asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump, to build a united Canada, to build a Canada.
Look, this has got to be the biggest political gathering of the 21st century.
We got 5 days left. I didn't hear any bell. Did you guys hear a bell? This fight's not over. We're here fighting every single day.
We are, either we like it or not, part of an artificial country with very little meaning called Canada.
I'll say this, the reason I'm optimistic is that in my riding of Saanich Gulf Islands, I'm in the lead. Doesn't matter how many media stories are out there saying, oh.
Welcome back to our special election edition of Power Play. The first polls in Canada are set to close in less than 90 minutes in Newfoundland and Labrador, with the last polls closing at 10 o'clock Eastern in British Columbia and the Yukon. With more on what we should all be watching for tonight, let's bring in an election edition of our front bench. Former NDP leader and CTV News political analyst Tom Mulcair is with us. Former Conservative cabinet minister and now senior advisor at Edelman, James Moore, is here. And former Liberal New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant is with us this evening. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Vashti.
Nice to see you. Tom, I'll start with you. If there is one storyline you're watching tonight, what is it?
I'm going to watch what happens with the Bloc in Quebec, because I think that the GTA is going to be pretty well rock-solid Liberal. There'll be a few exceptions, but it's going to be mostly theirs. But Quebec is going to decide a lot about this election, more than usual. And I think that the Bloc could be in for quite a tumble. And at dissolution, they had 33 seats. I think that they're going to be well below that. And that might be the tail of the tape in terms of the Liberal fortunes overall.
James, is there something in particular that you've got your eye on tonight?
It's kind of in phases, actually, as the polls close from east to west. I have sort of something for each region, but I'll stick to one. 343 seats in the entire Parliament of Canada. The last of those 43 that'll be counted are all in the province of British Columbia. The polling, you know, the aggregators that try to predict the elections, they show that about 1 in 3 seats in the province of British Columbia are a toss-up, and it's a mix between Conservative and NDP or Conservative and Liberal or three-way fights. So the final constitution of this Parliament and what it looks like and who will be ahead and not could very well be decided in my home province of British Columbia. So I think it'll be a very fascinating last final mile of the night.
At the very least, the NDP future will certainly be decided in that. At the most, as you point out, it could be the entire election. Brian, the same question to you. What's one thing you're watching for tonight?
Well, two good answers by my colleagues. I'll pick something here in Atlantic Canada, and even more specifically, New Brunswick. Two ridings that will obviously come in before the vast majority of the country, since our polls will close earlier. Two ridings in New Brunswick that I'd be looking at, Fredericton and the riding of Miramichi-Grand Lake. So Fredericton is actually held by the Liberals, but it could be a tougher one this time around. I heard rumors that there were some polling in the region that said it might be tighter. What would be interesting there is if the Liberals pull it off, that probably means it's because the Greens and the NDP crater. That riding has sort of 3-4 parties fighting in that region typically. And then Miramichi-Grand Lake, held by the Conservatives right now. The outgoing MP is not running again. A MLA here in New Brunswick is running for the Tories. And then the Liberal candidate is the same candidate as last time around, who ended up losing, but was a minister actually under my government. So that riding, if it flips, those are two that I think could give us a bit of a picture of what's going on in Atlantic Canada for sure, and maybe give us a window into the rest of the country.
Tom, I have only anecdotal evidence, but my sense is, given the conversations I've been lucky enough to have with people who watch this program and other things that CTV does, is that it is the most engaged I can remember Canadians on an election, but also all that preceded it, right? Because the drama actually really came prior to the campaign, both in a domestic way, but also, you know, vis-a-vis Donald Trump. What is your impression of how engaged people are, and how do you think that might inform what ends up happening?
I think that there was an objective measure of that with the 7.5 million Canadians who decided to go to the advanced polls. That's engagement. And it's very difficult to read something into that. You can't really determine in advance what's already in the ballot box for them. But you can sense that in the Canadian population, this is the most important election in a generation. It's also the first time in over a generation we've had essentially a two-way race. That's why it's been so tough for the third parties, whether it's the Greens or the NDP or indeed the Bloc. Everybody's just being pushed out of the way. It's a battle royal, between two very opposing visions for the country, that of Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives and Mark Carney's Liberals. And we'll find out in a few hours which one of those prevails. It's, of course, all been tempered and conditioned by somebody who is not here, and that's Donald Trump. And that, I think, is still going to remain the ballot question. Which of those two is best positioned to be able to take on Trump, the tariffs, the threat to Canada's sovereignty? That is one of the things that will determine the result tonight.
Well, you bring up a good point, which is that is definitely, James, the ballot box question, as the Liberals hope it to be, right? The question of how to navigate Donald Trump. The Conservatives ended up advocating for a different ballot box question, one around change. Do you think they're mutually exclusive, or do you think ultimately voters will determine one over the other?
I don't. I mean, for 10 years, you know, the Liberals have been in governments, right? 3 successive mandates in a row. The idea to get a 4th mandate in a row, even with the new leader, is a bit of a reach. Obviously, you know, Mark Carney has changed the narrative. Donald Trump has changed the narrative again. But Pierre Poilievre has seeded the ground quite effectively for a very long time now about the lost decade of economic growth in Canada and what that's meant for Canadian families and their prosperity, the inflation crisis, rising debts on the family basis, all that stuff. So Donald Trump comes along and he changes the narrative, yes, but there's still a narrative out there that the biggest threat to Canada is the consequences of Donald Trump. It's not just on our national unity and national sovereignty, but also the cascade effect in the economy. So if Pierre Poilievre is seen as the right person to rebuild the economy and to have that forward-leaning agenda, and Donald Trump is threatening Canada and the consequences are economic, then that could be accretive to Pierre Poilievre. But clearly, I think there are 2 competing ballot questions, right? After 10 years, it's time for change. And then on the other side, it's Donald Trump as a threat, Mark Carney is the answer. The question is, which of those voting cohorts has the greatest velocity and volume in order to deliver for either Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney? I don't think they're entirely mutually exclusive. You can be really dissatisfied with 10 years of Liberals and also really dislike Donald Trump and vote Conservative. You can also be wanting change and really dislike Donald Trump and think that Mark Carney is sufficient change for you and be satisfied that vote will satiate those 2 needs. So we'll see which quantum will win tonight.
Do you have an instinct, Brian, as to which one will bring voters out in greater numbers?
Ask me in a couple hours.
And okay, I'll ask Brian right now.
So look, I agree with James and his analysis. So let me start off there. Second, I think if you would have asked all of us at the start of the campaign, it was pretty clear that for all Canadians, there was nothing else really on their minds other than Trump, other than our sovereignty, other than the economic pain that he was threatening to cause and then ultimately was trying to cause. So I think that was very clearly on people's minds. Now, did that seep in and it's enough for that to be the only thing going on right now? Maybe not, and frankly, probably not. I think there's no question that for years people had been talking about affordability and the cost of living crisis that so many Canadians were fighting. So I think that was built in too. So to James's point, I think both those things can be true at the same time. Nevertheless, I think you were just on with Nick Nanos, and I think it's fair to say that somewheres at the start of April, maybe people started to say, well, the Trump thing seems to maybe have cooled down a little bit, but I still care deeply about affordability. So we started to see maybe some numbers shift a little bit. At the same time, though, I do think that the Liberals have tried very hard to do what they could to sort of obviously paint the picture that this isn't done, which obviously it isn't. I mean, Kuzma's obviously still something that needs to be negotiated. So are both of those top of mind for Canadians? I think absolutely so. Which one will end up winning? If I had to guess, I would probably say the Trump card, no pun intended, is one that you just can't get away from given what's happened over the last few months.
I just have time for one last quick round. Tom, do you think any questions of leadership will be decided tonight depending on the outcome? Like, will any of the leaders make calls about their own future, or is that saved for another moment?
I think it's saved for another moment, but I do think it's safe to say that the NDP's had a particularly tough time for the reason we were discussing earlier. It became a two-way race, and they got squeezed out, and probably squeezed harder than most, because there's a lot of mobility of their vote towards the Liberals. And I think it might be a difficult evening for Mr. Singh. Despite her brave words earlier, I also think that it could be difficult for Elizabeth May. You know what? It's concentric circles around the gravitational center, which is Montreal, and the red circles are going to be reaching out. It could even reach out to Mr. François, the bloc. Yeah, sorry,
yes, yeah.
Might actually reach right out to his riding. It's quite possible.
James, your thoughts on Poilievre? I mean, if he's able to secure 39% of the vote and still lose, I don't see him trying to go anywhere, but I may be wrong.
Look, Pierre Poilievre has been one of the most successful leaders in a very, very long time, certainly since Stephen Harper, in terms of fundraising, caucus solidarity, the energy. He might have the highest voter turnout and just raw vote totals as a percentage of the voting base of the country of any leader that we've seen in almost 40 years. I mean, that's a pretty good starting point, and I think he's got a firm grip on the party. I agree with Tom, though. I think Jagmeet Singh will lose his riding. This is his third campaign, and the longer he's been there, the worse he's done, and I think that's time for him to go. And I think the voters will show him the way very quickly. I also think Elizabeth May is probably going to lose her riding in Saanich Gulf Islands to the Conservatives.
I got less than 30 seconds. If Mark Carney loses, is he sitting in opposition benches, Brian?
Well, I think he'll be given the chance to do so. I mean, he took a party that was in disarray and gave it a shot. And on Singh, I'm going to add, just because I think somebody probably didn't want to do that, he inherited a party and halved the seats in one of the elections. So certainly if he doesn't have a good run today, he's going to have a tough night. Poilievre, I think if I were advising him, I'd say no matter what happens, take some time to think it over. You certainly have a lot of things that you can say that you merit another shot.
I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Tom Mulcair, James Moore, and Brian Gallant.